You described it as a great day.
Oh, yes.
Why do you feel that way?
Oh, it was a complete catharsis, Catherine. It was just great. I have to take you way back to the mid-90s and how upset I was then when the user agreement was first signed. And my argument was a strong one in the sense that if you're going to enter into a user agreement, you must have some degree of control over the ownership. Otherwise, it becomes lifeline becomes a commodity on the international finance markets. And isn't that exactly what happened? And very much to our detriment, because the money that went into the steam packet was drained out into the finance markets of the world. And effectively, the finance markets of the world have been silently, with their dark, slippy hands, putting their pockets into the hands of every person on the island, every family, every household, every business since then. That money should have stayed on the Isle of Man, didn't. The actions taken by Tynwald and by the government and by Treasury have ensured that comes to a halt. In the future, our lifeline will be ours, and that's incredibly important.
There were some concerns raised. I mean, it was predominantly a positive debate.
Yeah.
Most members were in favour. There was one member who voted against it, though, and Mrs. Beecroft's argument was that Tynwald needed more time. I mean, this was all done very quickly in terms of the amount of time members had to consider it before they had to vote on what is quite a big decision and a lot of money.
Indeed. I think Kate made 2 points. I think she made the point, as you've just articulated, that we were rushed, and the second one was, well, the price, 124 million, how do you get to that? Well, let me try and answer both. It was a very difficult situation that the Treasury were in, and I mean, I'm not their apologist, but this is my understanding of it, and that it just simply wouldn't lend itself to being a prolonged debate in the public arena, and Treasury did what they had to do, and therefore the time scales were tight. I think more the question in the public mind is, why on earth 124 million? And at first sight it does seem a lot, but all I would say to that is that was the right price. Had we left it any longer, then back to this international finance markets issue, not the steam packet, not the company that runs the service, but the owners, they would be absolutely driven from now till the end of the user agreement, making absolutely sure they squeezed every pound they could out of the business, and that would be to the profound detriment of the Isle of Man. And it should be remembered, once the Isle of Man owns the steam packet again, then returns from that point onwards will come back to the Isle of Man. So effectively, if you said, for the sake of argument, that the margin was £15 million a year, then we're talking about £100+ million coming back into the Manx economy that otherwise wouldn't have done so. And the other point that I think is quite possibly worth making is that even at the end of the user agreement, it would have still been possible for that company, effectively, if they refused to engage, to try to compete by accessing one of the two link spans, which would have been legally difficult but not impossible, and could have caused chaos. So it was the right decision at the right time at the right price.
Now, in terms of that price, £76 million is going to be essentially a loan. So the operator of the services is really being saddled with £76 million worth of debt starting off. There is a perception in some quarters, certainly amongst some of the public, that government taking on the steam packet and owning it would lead to reduced fares. But presumably the only way this operator is going to have to pay back that £76 million is by continuing to charge the fares they do, or increasing them.
Well, on the face of it, yes, but in reality, no. I mean, the first thing I would say there is that now the steam packet is owned by the government. It's an incredibly secure investment for outside funds. It's always possible to restructure that debt in different ways that would make it less demanding to pay back in whatever form than the current arrangement, where the debt in the company as it stood prior to the purchase would have to have been paid down by 2026. So the whole arrangement is much more flexible once the government own the company, and the stress related to the debt starts to significantly diminish.
This sort of arrangement with government and essentially a private operator, a private company, would seems to link in with a motion you had a few months ago in terms of partnerships for investment and the government taking a completely different look at infrastructure projects. Are there more projects like this, more items in the Isle of Man that you would like to see the government step in and create this sort of infrastructure for?
Well, when I took that motion to the floor of the House with regard to financial structures, I had in the back of my mind the possibility that we might get to a position where we would be willing to buy the steam packet. And yes, that is one option, but there are all sorts of ways of structuring money. And it's very clear, if you look around many cities in Britain, that the way we're investing in our infrastructure in our towns, etc., is falling behind many areas in the UK, and we need to learn from that. And the select committee concerned will not come back to Tynwald with, and this is quite an unusual arrangement, I'm not sure it's been done before, with a set of specific recommendations which Tynwald or the council ministers has to consider and say yes or no on. It's an advisory research paper which I hope will be inculcated into departments' thinking, into council ministers' thinking, into members' thinking, so that we see there are actually a lot more opportunities out there than we actually realise. And it's not all a question of just, oh, we've got these reserves, we've got to spend them. There are lots and lots of opportunities out there to make things happen, and we need to start making things happen more than they have been.
But there are a lot of advisory documents sitting on the shelves of government offices gathering dust.
Well, perfectly true, but if we don't reach out and become bolder in the coming years, then we will find that the Isle of Man seriously starts to slip behind. And does anybody want that? It's up to the members of Tynwald to make sure that doesn't happen.